I'm Terry Gordon, a senior editor at the New English Review, and this is probably our 12th discussion about the war between Israel and its enemies in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Tehran, to be quite honest about it. So let us start, as we normally do, General, with a prayer for both Sahal, the IDF, as well as the State of Israel.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, it is appropriate and the right thing to begin our discussion with a prayer for peace, a prayer for the IDF, prayer for the people of the State of Israel and the Jewish population of the world, right, which have been so traumatized and shocked by this war between the forces of evil. Iran behind it all, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all the tentacles of Iran. But the people of Israel have stood strong before, throughout time, and they continue to stand strong despite the brutal assault on people and despite the destruction that's been led upon them by Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. May they continue to be successful and to continue to thrive as a people.
It's been 330 days, would you believe, since October the 7th, 2023, when 1,200 Israeli and other foreign nationals were killed by barbarians of Hamas. IDF casualties now exceed 800 total killed, with potentially more than 3,500 injured, number fairly seriously. Of the 252 hostages taken on October 7th, 97 remain, including the bodies of 33 confirmed dead by the IDF. The IDF is now engaged in a multi-front war backed by Iran, using Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and now a counterterrorism campaign in the West Bank against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and assortment of Palestinian terror groups. So let's start with the most shocking disclosure. That's the murders of 6 Israeli and American hostages, which has led to mass demonstrations in Israel demanding Prime Minister Netanyahu to cave on the sticking point of maintaining control of the Philadelphi corridor for a ceasefire and hostage releases. What was his reply in his address to the nation?
Netanyahu continues to stand strong despite so many attacks on his character and so many attacks on his strategic wisdom. Netanyahu basically replied that as much as he is sad and apologetic that they weren't able to bring these 6 hostages home, he's not going to relent on demanding that Israel retain occupation of the Philadelphi corridor or the Netzarim corridor, which splits Gaza from east to west. And he has good reason to do that. One, they were captured or they were conquered and taken by many deaths and wounded among the IDF soldiers that took it. Both the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphi corridor are strategic. The Philadelphi corridors, the reason that Hamas is now once before they could use tunnels and routes to get in Gaza from Egypt, they can't do that anymore. The Philadelphi corridor is sealed off. Netzarim corridor prohibits back and forth movement across the east-west axis in Gaza, and Israel, the IDF, are not going to allow that to be interrupted again. There is some discussion in the cabinet between those like the Minister of Defense, apparently, who thinks that the Philadelphia corridor can be temporarily relinquished and they can go back in. The problem with that, of course, is that it was taken with the force of arms and the lives of IDF soldiers who will have to be expended again, even if they could do it. As we remember, the U.S. put incredible pressure on Israel not to go into the Philadelphi corridor. Egypt continues to put pressure on Israel not to stay there in the Philadelphia corridor. And if Israel leaves, as Netanyahu said, we were gone from it for 20 years. It's going to be 42 before we can go back. But it's absolutely essential that they hold on to those two corridors. The other reason that he stands strong, there are a significant number of protesters in the streets now. Some press reports say 300,000, others say there's no way you can fit 300,000 in the space that they claim that they were. It's hard to know who to believe. But even that doesn't matter. This is an attempt at a coup by people who've been trying to get Netanyahu to step down, and the Likud party won the election fair and square in December 22, and they have continually faced protests for one thing or another since then. This is just the latest effort to try to get his government to fall so that they can have a new prime minister. Who would it be? Nobody knows, but it would be disruption. It would be chaos in a time when Israel needs to stand strong and confront Hamas and Iran. They can't afford to look weak, any weaker than they already do.
So why is the Biden administration supporting a non-negotiable ceasefire and hostage release deal negotiated by, guess who? Egypt and Qatar, certainly the most questionable partners for peace.
Yeah, Egypt and Qatar have been questionable partners forever. Egypt is a treaty with Israel not to attack each other. Qatar has no such treaty, but Qatar is always trying to play the spoiler to any relationship that Israel has with Arab countries. And it's not changed since the beginning of this war. Qatar has always been on the fence or against Israel in its negotiating stance. And Egypt, if anything, has only gotten more difficult as the war has gone on. Why does the Biden administration oppose, or why do they support this non-negotiable treaty? Honestly, to characterize it as the Biden administration is somewhat untrue. We know that Joe Biden is senile. We've seen it ourselves on camera. We've heard it ourselves on recordings. He is not in charge right now. The person who's making the decisions on what's going on in the Middle East is Blinken. And Tony Blinken is the Secretary of State, a very powerful man who's been a supporter of the Oslo Accords since the beginnings of his time in the State Department back in the 90s. He's worked for Joe Biden and been his foreign policy guru since the mid-noughts. He was placed in position as Secretary of State when Biden became the president, and he's called the shots since then. So Blinken's an absolute proponent of the two-state solution. He's an absolute opponent of Netanyahu. They don't like each other. And let's leave aside the bitterness between Netanyahu and Biden, because I just basically took him out of the picture. But Netanyahu and Blinken are not friends. And so I think a lot of this is just Blinken wants one final chance to get Netanyahu to step down. And if Netanyahu agrees to a ceasefire right now, his coalition will break up, and there'll have to be new elections, and he will be out of power. Personally, I think that would be a disaster for Israel at this point. As much as I question Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are the leaders of the far right parties that hold up the coalition right now, I don't question the dedication of probably at least half of the Israeli people who do not want the government to go. I think there's probably a better prime minister on the horizon, but right now is not the time to change horses. It's midstream.
Israel's Air Force pulled off a last-minute preemptive attack early morning on August the 25th. with 200 aircraft hitting Hezbollah sites minutes before 320 rockets and drones were launched from Lebanon. Sheikh Nasrallah called it a successful phase one retaliation for the Israeli assassination of their supreme commander, Fuad Shukar. What is the reality of these actions by both sides in Israel's north and Lebanon's south?
I don't think anything got settled by that. It would be uncharacteristic for Hezbollah to say anything other than we won. They're not going to admit that they lost. I think their assault was blunted by the Israeli Air Force. No, in fact, I don't have any question about that. But the Israeli Air Force didn't carry out the kind of strikes that would set back Hezbollah terminally by any means. What they probably did is forestall the attack, forestall a larger attack, and certainly forestall a general outbreak of war. I think everyone who's watching the situation wants peace as opposed to war. At some point, Israel is going to have to deal with Hezbollah, but I think they assessed that right now is not the right time to come to that conclusion. So the attack was, I think, successful in blunting Hezbollah's attack.
Certainly, those 60 to 70,000 Jews in the north who've been, how shall I put it, housed elsewhere are suffering economically as well as spiritually from being essentially tossed out of those wonderful villages on the northern frontier.
Well, I think many of us have friends who live in the northern Galilee,
right,
close to the border with Lebanon, and you're absolutely right. Those were thriving communities with businesses and places of worship and just life going on. And now they're now located, most of them either in the Jerusalem area or in the Negev. As we're talking tens of thousands of Israelis who are displaced. They're not happy. They want to go home.
Yeah. One of the alleged targets of Hezbollah's massive barrage was the Mossad base at Lilot and Unit 8200 Intelligence Center. So what was Hezbollah's rationale as to why they didn't attack these Israeli intelligence and cybersecurity complexes near Herzliya?
I think the main reason they didn't attack is because I think they realized that might actually incur a disastrous response from their perspective by the IAF. I think that they probably know that the gloves would be off if they did that attack. And so that plus their inability to accurately target probably led to them deciding not to make that attack.
Prior to this dramatic exchange, Israel's Air Force had ranged in Lebanon's north, hitting Hezbollah targets in the Baalbek Valley. How well protected are Hezbollah's revetments and command facilities underground, and who might have assisted in building these tunnels?
I think it's possible that they were assisted by Iran or Russia. I don't think that we can expect that China was involved, but I think Russia has a reason to help them protect, and I think Iran certainly has a reason, since Hezbollah is basically it's a unit of the Islamic Republican Guard Corps anyway. So I think those are probably the suspects. In terms of the quality of the revetments, they're good enough to keep Nasrallah alive. He's using the revetments. He's using that as a place for himself to hide. And apparently, many of the other senior Hezbollah and senior Islamic Republican Guard people in Lebanon use them as well. So they're very well built, and it's been successful.
My suggestion is that the possibility arises that North Korea, which contracts out many of its workers to engage in tunneling activities elsewhere, may have done this. And the reason I say that is I point to the fact that North Korea built the plutonium bomb factory in Syria that the IAF and the Sayeret Kyle were successful in destroying. And they were
I think
photographed
I endorse
at
the
that.
suggestion. I think you're probably right.
Okay. Right. What was the impact on Iran and Hezbollah's responses to the IAF attack in mid-April on the Russian-supplied S-300 air defense system near Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities?
They were shown to be ineffective, first of all. So the S-300 has a wonderful reputation worldwide as an advanced air defense system, but it didn't perform to standard when Israelis attacked. So I think I'm sure that they're recalibrating their air defense capability. I don't know if they're able to do it, but they realize the Israelis can probably hit them wherever they are.
Unlike Israel's war with Hamas and Gaza, how successful has Iran's supply of rockets, precision-guided missiles, and Shahid drones to Hezbollah and Lebanon, despite Israel's Air Force wars in Syria?
The Iranian supply of drones and missiles to Hezbollah has been very successful. At best estimates, they have up to 150,000 aerial vehicles that they can use to attack Israel, and most, if not all of them, are from Iran. They continue to provide support to Hezbollah. As I mentioned earlier, Hezbollah is a subordinate unit of the Islamic Republican Guard Corps. It's not like Hamas, which is a subsidiary or an ally, but Hezbollah is fully under control of the IRGC. So it's up to the Iranians to provide them the kind of weapon support that they need to conduct operations, and they've continued to supply weapons and equipment to Hezbollah throughout this war.
In a massive show of force, the U.S. positioned two powerful carrier battle groups and a nuclear-armed Trident missile submarine in the Mediterranean and the Arabian Seas. What message did the Biden administration send to Iran and its proxies in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea?
I think a very positive message that the United States would attack Iran or attack Hezbollah if there is a major attack on Israel. That this time that might be an offensive action if Iran were to do something along the lines of what they did in April. Two carrier battle groups, and both of them, by the way, in the southern Arabian Sea, are positioned closer to Iran than they are to Israel. This is significant in terms of location. We don't know where the nuclear submarine is. I suspect it may be in the Med, could be in the Arabian Sea. We just don't know. But the fact that there's a nuclear submarine with guided missiles which could attack Iran, that's not a weapon system that you're going to bring to bear against Hezbollah. That's a weapon system that can be brought to bear against Iran. So I think the main thrust of the message is against Iran, telling them that attack on Israel now could be responded to effectively, quickly, and overwhelmingly if it occurred. I still think Israel is hugely vulnerable because it doesn't take the difference between defending Israel and conducting an offensive against Iran. You can just conduct the offensive against Iran all you want, but it only takes one missile to take out a city like Haifa or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. All three are hugely vulnerable to Iranian missiles. It only takes one missile to get through, and that would be disastrous. We think we're already plunged into sadness, and I would not use the word despair because I know despair is not a Jewish word, but I would say that we're plunged into sadness by what happened with the 6 hostages, the executed hostages. I think the effect of a massive attack on Haifa or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv would be that much more traumatic for Israel and for the Jewish community.
Israel also has in its inventory of strategic weapons, of course, the Jericho 3 ICBM, which has a nuclear warhead fixed to it. And on top of that, lurking in the bottom of the Arabian Sea are 1 or 2 patrols of Israel's Dolphin subs, German-made subs, I might add. But those systems are also nuclear enabled. That is independent of the United States. But Israel is perhaps unlikely to do that because of the opprobrium involved. But nevertheless, it should not be lost on the audience who sees these reports that Israel does have that capability as a massive deterrent, essentially against an evil enemy in Tehran. In the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and Gaza, the IDF has gained control, as we talked earlier, of the Philadelphi border tunnel complex with Egypt, access to the Mediterranean Sea, as well as areas of Rafah and Netzarim, as we had discussed, and the humanitarian corridors in the enclaves north and center, using air, ground, and naval forces. Has that weakened Hamas and isolated its commanders?
I think there's no question that IDF operations have weakened Hamas maybe as much as 80%, and maybe as much as 40 to 50% of the tunnel complex, which is a shocking number because how many more tunnels can there be? But the IDF is clearing tunnels every day, and they don't seem to be diminishing in terms of the size or the number of them. But has it had an impact on Sinwar, the leader of Hamas and the military leader of Hamas in Gaza, now that Mohammed Deif is gone? Sinwar appears to be in touch with enough of his subordinates to conduct some sort of operation, but so many of his subordinates have been killed. His ability to communicate has been vastly diminished. The word is that he now operates on, if he goes up above the ground, he's wearing a burqa to protect himself, disguised as a woman, which probably a good idea, because if he were openly walking around as Sinwar, people would know who he was and he could be killed. I'm sure he's worried about his survival, and I think that's, people think he must have some hostages around him as a last barrier. So I think his operations have been severely constrained by the IDF. I think in terms of how well the IDF has done, despite the fact it's been more than 11 months, the IDF's done really great work. And if we remember back at the beginning of operations, the IDF said this is going to take months, that this was going to be a war that goes on for months and months. And unfortunately, that was a good prediction.
Let me ask you a question. Who do you think funded the so-called metro in Gaza?
I think the funding for the metro in Gaza came not just from Iran. It was funded indirectly by, among others, the United States government, who sent money, who have been sending money to Iran to allow them to export oil for the last 5 years. And Iran has made millions of dollars on that. The United States also paid money to Iran to retrieve American hostages from Iran. So, I think we have to look at ourselves as well. Have we given money to Iran over the course of the last decade? And I think the answer to that is clearly yes.
I think that's something in the neighborhood of $70 billion.
Yes, and that should give us pause. What were we doing? But I don't think there's any question that that money that went to Iran has been used to finance Hamas and their tunnel complexes.
Part of Netanyahu's strategy as regards the question of support in Gaza was permitting Qatar to literally send in valises of millions and millions of dollars. What do you think that those funds were used for?
No, I think those were used for building tunnels, for getting weapons, and weapons factories in Gaza, and not just for small arms, but for all sorts of rockets and missiles and everything else that could be used to fight Israel. It's worth mentioning, I think, that when Iran funds Hamas, they're funding their own operations too. There have been IRGC in Gaza, and they fight side by side with the Hamas, and they certainly fight side by side with Hezbollah in the north, and with Syria on the eastern border. Iran is their fingers are completely entrenched in funding operations against Israel in Gaza and in Lebanon as well.
Well, it's interesting to me. Back in 1994, Iran and Hezbollah in Latin America were the ones who pulled off that horrible explosion that destroyed the Jewish community center in Argentina, Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
So their blood-soaked hands go back decades.
And worldwide,
attacking global Jewry.
Yeah.
So how effective have been the published interviews and commentary of urban warfare experts like former UK Lieutenant Colonel Richard Kemp, John Spencer, former US Army Major and Director of the West Point Center for Modern Warfare? How effective has that been in countering misinformed media reports on the effectiveness of IDF ground operations against Hamas and Gaza?
Well, unfortunately, effectiveness has to be measured on the outcome, and they are throwing rocks into a flowing river of media, which is attacking Israel every day, including in our country. So, are they effective spokesmen? Yes, they are, and they're knowledgeable and should be listened to. But the media is so much against Israel that they're really another frame of reference would be spitting in the wind. I love their commentary. I love what they say. I think it's accurate. Certainly rings true with me. I don't know either one of them except what they've written, but they're both from a very knowledgeable and respectable perspective. But it's unfortunate how completely the worldwide media and many governments are just full on attacking Israel for this, and they would admit that. They would bemoan that as well. Both Spencer and Kemp have actually commented on, they know that they're saying the truth because they have this experience. Both of them have experience in Gaza and they have seen the operation. So they're very comfortable talking about it from their own knowledgeable perspective, but their eyewitness perspective. But there's such a flow of information against Israel, which doesn't give them the coverage that they deserve.
The other individual I can point to is the former IDF spokesperson, John Conricus, who's the senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies here in the U.S. and Washington, D.C. He's been featured fairly consistently, delivering the reality of what he has seen in the operations in Gaza to networks like Fox and the Christian Broadcasting Network, which have an influential audience here in the United States.
If I may bring up another individual who's been featured pretty frequently on I-24, the Israeli channel, in the last several months, is Elliot Kodov. He's a major in the IDF, in the reserves, with a great, he's a tremendous strategist. I happen to know him personally. He's been in our home. He's really very knowledgeable, and he has continued to be a great representative of what's really going on in the area. He has a podcast called Conflict Uncovered, which I recommend to everyone, as well as his his I-24 presentations.
IDF Major General Aharon Halevi, former director of IDF military intelligence, apologized in his remarks at his retirement and change in command for his failure to prevent the October 7th Hamas pogrom that killed 1,200 civilians, seized 252 hostages, and resulted in hundreds of IDF combat deaths and seriously wounded service personnel. What have been the interim findings from the investigation demonstrative of the failures of the IDF Intelligence Directorate to forward warning reports from unarmed IDF Gaza border Unit 8200 women observers, many of whom were killed or taken as hostages?
One of the conclusions of the initial intelligence investigation was that the intelligence was not passed on to leadership, that there was a mid to upper level of the Israeli intelligence establishment led by Halevi that just disregarded the tactical warnings from the women of the Unit 8200 observers. And I would commend to everyone the book, The October 7th War by Seth Fransman, who describes that in some detail. And the book is worth reading just for that, but it's got so many other important details about what happened, especially in the first part of the war. Halvi himself he's apparently retained his reputation as an IDF general. He wasn't fired. He was allowed to continue to serve until just 3 months ago. But there's some indication that his family, his wife especially, who's on the left in Israeli politics, may have been, at least in some ways, as spouses often are, in some ways an influence on him. It's also the case that, and I think he would admit this, that the ability of the Unit 8200 warning units on the border, they were unable to get their messages out in the days prior to October 7th. So they were, and many of them, I don't want to give numbers because I don't remember right off the top of my head, but more than half of the Unit 8200 observers were massacred themselves,
Yes.
overrun by Hamas. I mean, they're right on the border. Hamas came up on them without any protection from any other units and put them all in a building and slaughtered them. So only a few of the observers survived the first assault. I think Halvi builds a bright. If he's implicated, I don't know about that, but I do think though that his inability to harness the information from these tactical frontline observers is certainly contributed to the Hamas success and to the failure of the IDF to protect its own units.
Let me deal with a item that hit the press late last month, and that was the reports of IAEA inspectors, and particularly the analysis of Dave Albright's Washington-based Institute for the International Security and Science, that Iran was weeks away from having sufficient highly enriched uranium to assemble deliverable nuclear weapons, including possible miniature warheads for ballistic missiles. Does Israel have the capabilities to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities should a US-led strike not be possible? for political or diplomatic reasons.
Sadly, I don't think that they could do it. I think they'll need US support to take out the Iranian nuclear installations. I don't think they would hesitate if they thought Iran was about to go nuclear with a capability, which could still take some time because they'll have to figure out how to get the weapon onto the delivery vehicle and a number of other things. And I have no doubt the Israelis would do whatever they thought they could do to attack. But I sadly don't. I wouldn't put confidence in their ability to do that. I think the U.S. should have Israel's back here. We can count the number of times that U.S. policymakers have said, we're not going to allow Iran to develop a nuclear capability. Okay. Don't allow Iran to develop a nuclear capability. That's what we should do. The U.S. should do that. It's not only for Israel, it's for the world. If Iran has a nuclear capability, it's going to severely threaten the United States. Not just our interests, but our country.
And in fact, Iran has touted the development of an intercontinental ballistic missile that would hit the U.S. We'll see if that ever eventuates, or before that even eventuates, is destroyed essentially by a concerted coalition of Western countries.
Yeah, I think we all have a good reason to fear that capability. But the capability, once you have a nuclear weapon, the capability to get it delivered is not just dependent on ballistic missiles, as we know. Once they've got the capability, they're out of the box. And I think that's why we have to be extremely proactive about stopping Iran from getting a nuclear capability.
Of course, Iran's partner in that endeavor is essentially North Korea.
Yeah.
The Iranians have sent teams and aircraft to North Korea to participate in those tests, both of the nuclear devices as well as its missile trade. The only issue outstanding, as the former NORAD commander who I interviewed back in 2016 indicated, was whether or not North Korea had the ability to miniaturize warheads.
Yeah.
And that's not insignificant technology.
No, I'm sure that would be a real breakout capability as well. Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen. I mean, let's make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay. Well, General, this has been a highly informative and profound conversation. We wish Israel, the IDF, and all Jews who are afflicted by global anti-Semitism these days the hope and the resilience over several thousand years demonstrated by predecessors to not only survive and flourish. And I will give you one example, speaking about Unit 8200. If anything is the hot source for investment by Silicon Valley, it's Unit 8200. The Wall Street Journal article this past weekend, which profiled that relationship, was unbelievable in the context of showing how Israel's training of these young, talented individuals, sometimes from grade school up, essentially has made it significant in terms of cybersecurity and other forms of technology, to the point there's annual investments in tens of billions of dollars coming from other countries around the world taking advantage of it. And the secret of that was the ability of the least ranked individual to engage in serious discussion about whether the commander's thoughts were realistic and offering alternatives. And that has made Israel the truly dynamic startup nation in the Middle East. And we'd like to leave this on a positive note, even though the fighting goes on, and even though we have casualties. But resilience is the message we want to send to our listeners.
Absolutely. May God protect Israel and the Jewish people.